I'm going to take you through how to set boundaries with ADHD.
Task switching for an ADHD brain can be unpredictable, I think, is the kindest way to say that.
I burned out very hard between my master's and my PhD to the point where I ended up working in a bakery. Let's talk about how. How do we deal with boundary setting? Hi, everyone. Today's episode is a bit of a journey because we were going to talk about this topic based on the research, and then we found out we were the research, which was very confusing. So Sarah's going to take you through the journey of kind of what happened, and then we're going to hit you with those facts, that piece of research, those practical strategies all around this idea of boundary setting. So yeah, Sarah, how did it go?
I am so ready to take you guys on this journey because, yeah, it feels a lot like that how it started and where we are meme. Because I was just super excited. Me and Skye were talking. We were like, what are we going to talk about on the podcast next? And we were like, oh, yeah, let's teach people how to set boundaries. You know, we're going to find research helping our ADHD people. We can effectively set and keep those boundaries. We're going to protect ourselves from this cruel world, sunshine, rainbows, etc. However, I found a lot of different research. I tried different angles, you know. I mean, I think the first thing that I found when I typed in ADHD and boundaries was like, ADHD people are bad at recognizing people's boundaries.
I think this is the point at which I started getting the Slack messages from you. Just the journey of like, I'm not sure if we're going to do this. Maybe we're going to do something else.
I was sort of like, oh no, but I kept looking, right? You know, I tried searching it like self-advocacy because that's kind of like boundaries, right? And I just got a bunch of papers on helping college students to build self-advocacy skills so that they can access proper accommodations. So we're so bad at setting boundaries that we need to be taught.
Yeah, we learned the research thinks we're terrible at setting boundaries, which is, we knew. I mean, this is one of the reasons boundaries is actually a value of our organization. For those of you who don't know, It's literally in our organization along with other things. It was interesting because we wanted to know the how. We were like, okay, cool, bad at boundaries, got that. Like,
we already know we need to be taught how to do it properly, for sure.
But we couldn't find anything, you know, and you looked all over the internet. And in fact, you looked so hard that we usually go on Google Scholar or other places, you know, to find this information. But you actually ended up in Google, which is where you found something very interesting that I was not expecting.
Yeah. So once I sort of struck out finding any kind of framework on the scholarly sites, I went to Google and I was like, okay, cool. There's got to be somebody holistic out there who's proposing a framework for boundaries. And what did I find? But Unconventional Organization was the second hit on ADHD and boundaries from just like a basic Google search.
Yeah, and we've tried this on incognito search as well. We were really surprised because it's something I wrote in February of last year. Or actually, Muriel wrote it. Shout out to Muriel, wonderful research team. But we developed it. It's basically, if you search ADHD and boundaries, it's the second one. So go ahead, search it, send it to us, screenshot it if it works for you. But yeah, it really started you thinking maybe we should talk about, although we usually go with primary research sources, in this case, maybe it's worth making an exception.
Sure. I mean, first of all, there was no way I wasn't going to tell everybody about what I found because it was a big fat nothing. I would love it if somebody could hear this cry and see this gap and do the studies.
Yeah.
Or something. You know, maybe I didn't search like from the right angle. Anyway.
You did a lot of searching, though. You tried on many. If you find something on this topic of ADHD and boundaries that has a framework, please send it to us because you definitely looked.
Yeah, you can direct email me.
So we had a look, you know, at this piece of research, which obviously we have taught and it's become part of what we do, but we haven't really focused in on the article, and obviously Sarah will link it. I will say it is based in research, as everything we do is based in research. So I'm going to flag when that is the case, but it's not specifically ADHD research. So that there's articles like the Journal of Latinx Psychology, which looked at the qualitative analysis of boundary setting training among health workers. There's research like the Academy of Management Journal, which is talking about the effect of generosity and the frequency of favor exchange. And then, there's articles around mentoring university students with ASD, which talks a little bit about boundaries as well. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take you through how to set boundaries with ADHD, and we're going to help you provide some strategies, because this is something that, if we didn't know already, the research was very clear, we tend to struggle with when we have ADHD. So I'm going to just read you the little vignette at the beginning. I want you to close your eyes if you can, imagine yourself in this position, and then we'll talk about what are boundaries and how we can set them. You finally have some free time to finish those things you've been meaning to do. Then something else comes along and breaks your focus. Maybe it's an email from a needy client or a student. Maybe it's an after-hours question from your manager, or maybe it's a family member organizing a last-minute get-together. So this is kind of where boundaries come in. It's not necessarily you being in a position of this thing has happened and it's a very extreme thing. It's a space where you're being just pushed out of what you were planning, which isn't a bad thing. And we're going to talk in depth about, the pros and cons of all of these different things, but it can kind of make it very difficult for you to keep going, especially if people are taking. Sarah, can you think of an example in your own life where you feel like you let a boundary be pushed?
I would say absolutely every day. My children are pushing my boundaries in terms of, I already asked for this amount of time, and then immediately, as soon as that time begins, I get knock, 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 they come on the door because they need me, they want me. I love my children so much, but they don't respect boundaries either.
Yeah, 100%. Like, they're learning boundaries where, you're co-learning together. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, boundaries being pushed, it doesn't happen so much these days, but there was definitely a time where, when you're in academia, and I think a lot of you guys will know this, there's a lot of volunteering, there's a lot of support, and sometimes it was really great. And then sometimes it was a time where I probably could have said, you know what, I'm not going to do that because I have a test that I need to do, or I have something that I need to do, and, communicated in the way we will show in the future proactively. But I didn't, because I was young and I was anxious. And I really, really wanted to do a great job. And so, yeah, I definitely pushed those boundaries myself as well as with other people. Okay, so yeah, basically, if we're looking at these boundaries, the idea of boundaries, why are they so important to people with ADHD? Because sometimes it's interesting because we talk about the fact that we struggle with this, but there's also some possible reasons why we really need them, maybe even more than other people, because we have executive functioning struggles. And if you are doing the systems like we do in Focus Balance Days of prioritization filter, if you're doing some kind of step into focus routine to help you get work done, it's really tough when people keep pushing your boundaries and trying to just say like, well, just do it today. Don't worry about it tomorrow. Or I know that you're trying to get into flow to get some work done, but, I need you right now. So like, this isn't going to be an option. Those kinds of boundary pushing, and there's many other kinds of boundary pushing, but if we're really focusing on that kind of boundary pushing as an example, it can be really tough. It can be really tough with ADHD because we have to do a little bit more admin work to re-plan and reorganize than someone else might have to.
And honestly, even if it's just a quick interruption question like, hey, can I have, or like, they're doing this thing to me, that's still like a transition away from what you were doing and then having to switch back. And that kind of like task switching for an ADHD brain can be unpredictable, I think, is the kindest way to say that.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm going to say this here, and I will continue to say this throughout. We're not saying you have to be like robot automatons, like I made my plan on Monday and nothing will change me from it. But there is also a level where if everything that is interruptible is something that you just, it's fine
Allow.
because if you're really going to go with the flow of somebody else's day or, somebody else's life and have no boundaries, it's going to be very, very hard to get anything done. And I actually worked with a lot of clients. It's really where this came from, who were getting nothing done because they were there to respond to every notification on the emails and all of those kinds of things. And it's really hard. There's really no sustainable way to take on all the obligations that others have for you right now and also look after your own well-being and also get your work done. Like at some point, there does have to be a boundary. And there is some research that shows that there's a relationship between setting boundaries and psychological health. There's even a relationship between setting boundaries and better relationships. So these are things that are good in those kinds of relationships as well.
And I mean, if we're going to talk about like chains here, we also know that sort of lacking in boundaries is going to increase your stress levels, which is also going to increase the likelihood that your physical self starts to break down, right? Maybe your immune system weakens and you start to get sick. Maybe you physically injure yourself and now you're like, well, I've got way too much stuff to do and I can't even look at the computer.
Exactly. And I'll tell the story a little bit later on in this episode, but I burned out very hard between my master's and my PhD to the point where I ended up working in a bakery, which was not what I did my master's in. So yeah, it can have a really difficult effect. Hey, you listening to this podcast. If you like what we do and you want to hear more of it, there is one way to make sure that happens. Please go ahead, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. We have been told 5-star reviews can help us to get seen by more people, which means more people are going to learn about ADHD strategies.
Just press the button. Just give us a 5-star review.
So what is the first step? What is the first thing that you need to think about when you're thinking about ADHD boundary setting specifically? Often it's the overwhelm. When people come to us, they're feeling super overwhelmed. And so it's thinking, okay, which of your regular commitments, the things you have to do, the tasks you have to do, which of them are mandatory and which of them can be pruned, can be put into the not right now space. This is a whole conversation in itself. I was talking to Sarah before we came on here. So what we're going to do to help you do that is we're actually just going to drop the link for the prioritization filter. This is the exact prioritization filter currently that we have in Focus Balance Days. So if you want to see what that looks like, you want to get some support, just try that. It's going to help you go from overwhelm to focus in 10 minutes. I think it's going to be helpful. So we're just putting that there, but we're going to talk a little bit about what kind of boundary crosses. Who are these people? What are they like, the people that we might want to have boundaries with?
Well, they're probably not all neurotypicals. So I just want to say that right from the beginning.
That is very true. We are in no way. We know we can do this too.
Whenever you're having a conversation about setting boundaries, there needs to be so much compassion for everyone involved because a lot of times these can just be miscommunications. You know, it's just like this person was afraid to ask for clarity and so like they didn't and they misdelivered and then you misunderstood. So it's really just want to start off with that.
Well, we've got a couple of boundary crosses. We've got like 4 boundary crosses. So let's talk through those a little bit. The first one that we've got, and these are just some examples, so feel free to add your own as you go, is maybe somebody who is being unprofessional in a clearly professional context. So it might be if you're in academia, like I know a lot of you are, it might be a student who keeps emailing you to converse about non-work or non-school related topics, something like that. It might be people who want to do something that isn't within the context of the scenario that you're in.
The relationship that you have.
Yeah.
Another example of this might be someone who like keeps asking you to like go outside of this relationship, like outside of the environment.
Yeah. So if you're on like a Facebook group and someone's like, we should meet up, and you're like, I don't really know you, like,
yes.
You know, they're kind of trying to change things. That's a good example.
Or you know someone from school and then they want to take you out.
Exactly.
these are all times where you can sort of assert yourself and establish a dynamic.
Yeah. So it's like, when things are shifting, when you're in a teacher role or a student role or a internet stranger's role and someone's trying to change the boundary and you don't feel comfortable with that. So that's one example. The other one is somebody, and they we're just calling them boundary crossers to make it easier and also non-judgmental, because like I said, can be miscommunication. Somebody who is taking a substantial chunk of your time. Somebody who might not realize it, but maybe other aspects of your life are becoming overwhelming as a result. So examples could be a family member inviting you to dinner or inviting themselves to dinner multiple times a week. Somebody who always wants to go out, somebody who always wants to call, and maybe you haven't. And again, this, you can probably see an example here. In fact, you might be cringing with maybe your younger self who was too enthusiastic about a new friendship. And you can sort of see how easily we can end up in these situations. Do you have any thoughts on this one, Sarah?
That's interesting. I mean, I was going to say my toddler again.
I feel like
just the medical system in general. No. I mean, what I wanted to say about this type of person is I don't consider someone who just wants to spend a lot of time with me as like a boundary crosser, because I understand also the desire to spend a lot of time with another person. But I would consider this person to be someone who like makes me feel guilty when I want to say no. It's like, come on, you know?
Yeah.
And that's sort of the kind of person that a boundary is meant for, like this.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, because I agree, but I do remember when I was younger and I was undiagnosed and I was early 20s, kind of young. Sometimes you make a friend and you're like, this person is so cool. I want to like send them a bunch of messages about an idea I had and see if this is like something that they're also interested in. And maybe we should meet up. And actually, that was so cool. Like maybe we should meet up sometime later this week, and just kind of like being that person who enthusiastically didn't realize that this was taking a lot of someone else's energy. And that person might have been more, because I'm pretty extroverted. I can be. And so, especially when I was younger. And so I think I didn't always take into account like introvert needs and things like that as well.
Yeah, it's sort of like the lack of awareness that we struggle with sometimes as ADHD kids.
Exactly.
That is an interesting point. I think maybe I was that person, and so I just I never thought of that.
It's probably why we're on a podcast.
Yeah, yikes. I mean, also, this is related to all that social stigma research that does exist about ADHDers. Like, people don't always respond well to us. And so the likelihood of us reaching out like that does decrease over time. So if you were that kid, also, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And I have to say, that was a bit of a vulnerable share. But I thought it was important because I know that people feel like that. Like you said, Sarah, realizing that that's the thing. And that's okay. We learn, we grow, we develop as humans and as adults. Sometimes we are the boundary crosser.
Going off script.
So the next boundary crosser is somebody who wants you to do a lot of favors for them. So an example here would be someone who wants you to help. Maybe you know how to use the computers a bit more than they do. And even though you technically have an IT department and they can email that IT department, they're like, no, Jeff just does such a great job on this. I'm just going to keep asking him. And if you're Jeff, you're thinking, I don't know if I want to also take on the IT department's role. I have another job that I'm doing, but I'm happy to help. And so this person is somebody who asks a lot of favors. And this might be particularly in a work context, but maybe also in a family context. Do you want to give me a work example?
Yeah, absolutely. So if somebody reached out to me and asked me to do like a bunch of rescheduling requests, for example, or like throw together a video promo for them or any kind of graphic, really, I would be like, actually, that's not my super strength.
Yeah. That's a great point.
And that's how I would set that boundary. I would just be like, oh.
And that's very true. And actually, it's funny because I was recently talking to Russ on the podcast about delegation, having a healthy debate about delegation and ADHD. And this is an example of delegation. This is an example of what I call a catch and release, where you want to say, cool, why don't you give that to the person whose job it is? You know what I mean? Because it's not your job and you can do it once, but not all the time.
I think that one is a real challenge for us to assert ourselves with because one, we want people to like us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And two, how the heck do you say that politely?
Well, we will get to that part. We will get to that part.
Good.
We've got the 4 steps at the end. Yeah.
I will sit on my hands.
Yeah. But yes, it can be tough. And, there is some research to suggest that some degree of generosity is associated with better social outcomes, which is an insane way to say that sentence. Mostly if you're a nice person, people are nice back to you. And if you give to people, people give back to you. We know that kind of is a thing, but they made it research speak. But also it's about maintaining an equitable exchange of favors. That's what creates better productivity. So if one person is doing all the favors, the other person is doing none of the favors, that's not really providing you with the social outcome that you want. So you want to provide that balance between generosity and reciprocity. And then the last one, I think, honestly, of all of them is the one that I've been the most guilty of in my academic life, which is you are going above and beyond. So there are many aspects of your life in which you can distinguish yourself by demonstrating a much higher than average level of commitment. Maybe you stay late. Maybe you try and get the top grade. Maybe you do, additional volunteer work. I've done all of these things. And there's this idea that professional performance is, it could lead to something in the future, but it can also lead to burnout. And this is something that I think so many of us have struggled with.
Yes, I think the research on that is pretty clear. I definitely didn't call it burnout at the time, but I've had so many episodes of just like, oh my gosh, this is all so much. And I just can't.
100%.
And that's like the best way that I can explain it. Everything more just feels unnecessary for this audience.
Exactly. I mean, I guess I would share my story. So with my master's degree, I switched to sociology, even though I'd done psychology beforehand because I had ADHD and I didn't realize it at the time. And I was told, hey, if you're trying to do a totally different master's in something you've never done before, that's going to be really difficult. And I was like, I can do it. I am going to nail this. And so I did the extra coursework required. I tried really hard at my master's. I really enjoyed my master's. It was good. And I also, because I'd just moved out recently, was like, okay, let's get 2 jobs. Let's get 2 tutoring jobs on top of that. I can't even remember if I was doing anything else, but I was working at least 2 jobs, maybe 2.5, different jobs, teaching across different universities and doing a master's in a totally different space. And I was trying to just go above and beyond because that was what you did. There wasn't really an other option when you were trying to become an academic and stuff like that. And I burned out so hard that I got a PhD scholarship, but I don't even remember getting the scholarship. I don't even remember realizing that I had a scholarship and I could go and do a PhD. I was so burned out that at that point, I decided I was just going to leave academia. I was going to just do art. So I started an undergrad program just because I could. And it was, it was a space. Again, shout out to the wonderful New Zealand system of academia. I know it's not the same everywhere, but I did art. And then I got a job in a bakery to just pay the bills. And my academic colleague, I remember, walked into the bakery one day and was so surprised to see me there because she thought I was in a research lab somewhere. It was really only after a year when I actually met my now husband and I mentioned, oh yeah, I got a scholarship. And he was like, wait, what?
That is an insane story, but it kind of makes sense why we don't talk about sociology stuff ever, because probably you're having the helicopter noises in the background.
Well, technically, if you've done sociology, you'll know that it's in everything. So we don't talk about it ever, but we do it all the time. But yeah, anyway, so that's an example. That's a little example of going above and beyond and crossing your own boundary. The only person who really crossed the boundary there was me, actually. So let's talk about how. How do we deal with boundary setting? I will say up front, boundary setting does not always go amazing. And that is the really, really sad and unfortunate part of setting a boundary. It's worth knowing. It's worth giving yourself some dopamine for doing it, some fun reward. It's worth having a plan for when, after you do it, take a break, call a friend, do something, It's important to do, but it can be really difficult. So I really do want to create space for that. But this is how we do it. So there's 4 C's to boundary setting. The first is we want it to be clear. We want to make sure that people understand us. We want it to be communicated to that person. So it's kind of like clear twice because it's that important. We want it to be consistent. We don't want boundaries to shift depending on feelings and days. And we want the person to confirm that they have understood the boundary. So let's dive into these in a little bit more depth. Sarah, do you want to take us through what it means to have a clear boundary?
I think the reason why this one is first is because it's the most important. So a boundary is meant to reduce the confusion. And so you need to be clear. This is meant to be a kindness for everyone involved. And so keeping it as simple as possible is what's best. More words doesn't always equal more understanding.
Exactly. And Muriel says it really well here. She said, we often forego clarity in exchange for graciousness. But in the case of setting a boundary, you should not shy away from using clear and concise language. It will be much more awkward if they do not understand what you mean, and then you have to do this all over again. And I will say, especially with neurodiverse people, if you're setting a boundary with neurodiverse people, the research indicates we're not great with hidden language, hidden meanings, things that don't necessarily aren't clear. So if you say, there's the old adage, oh, the dishes are still here. That doesn't necessarily mean I am setting a boundary that you need to do the dishes after dinner. That is not going to, even saying something like, oh man, I'd love it if dishes got done. Dishes would be amazing. It's still not setting that boundary. So again, that clarity is really, really important. But one of the hardest things to do because, we're all out here rewriting our emails, a bunch of times to make them less.
Do we even know what we want?
Exactly. Well, and that's the second thing. So we need to communicate it. So again, we don't want to imply something. We want to state it outright. We also don't want to talk to the friend or the parent. We want to talk to the person or email the person. This is something, again, we don't have a lot of research on, but, everybody goes home and talks about something and is frustrated. But if you're not actually talking to the person that you are frustrated with, setting the boundary, even if you've told everybody else in the office, which I don't recommend, but even if you have, that person still doesn't know, you still haven't communicated a boundary. So it's worth mentioning.
And then also, do you or this other person have preferred methods of communication? Right? Would it be best to text this or do a phone call or show up in person, and just the different ways to manage everything that comes with those levels?
Yeah. Exactly. And sometimes, maybe this is a voice memo moment. Even if you do text, maybe this is a moment to send a voice memo or something along those lines so that people can hear your tone of voice. If you are worried about that, feel free to record it as many times as you want. Okay, so the next one we talk about consistency. This is tricky. This is really, really
Who's
tricky
that?
with ADHD. We are not good. If you look at focus balance days, our third section is inconsistent to consistent. This is a hard thing for us to do, but it's important. So I recommend if you set a boundary, write it down somewhere. Put it somewhere that you're going to remember that you set a boundary. Because even though it feels so important now, all the dopamine is for this conversation and you feel like this is put in your brain. It's never going to come out. It might disappear. You might totally forget about it.
Yeah. Or the unfortunate situation of when the other person tries to say that you agreed on something different. So again, another instance where writing things down ahead of time, not only is that going to help you communicate what you're trying to communicate in the moment, it's also going to protect you later on in case your sanity is called into question.
Yeah, that is a really good point and worth knowing. Definitely. Writing things down is great. Even if you aren't writing things down, I have heard before, if you're in a meeting, for example, and you have a conversation about a boundary or something like that, sometimes it can be nice to send a super friendly email just saying, like, I'm so glad we had that conversation and this boundary that I've written down is now going to be a thing. It can be helpful. Obviously, you know the situation of the person best. Always listen to your own support team, the people around you. We do not know your exact scenario. But yeah, the last thing is confirmed. And this is really just about making sure that the person has gotten the information. If you send a letter, we've all watched those movies. If you send a handwritten letter, do not assume that person has gotten it. It might have been lost in the post. It might have disappeared. An email can disappear just as easily under spam, etc. So it's important.
Honestly, you can't even trust read receipts these days because the amount of times I'll open a message and then somebody smacks my phone out of my hand and then, I don't know, do I get back to that message? Maybe.
Sarah does mean her children.
Oh, yes, I definitely do mean my children. Yikes.
Yeah, otherwise you're going to have to set some boundaries.
I am working on that. By the way, it's just like it takes a lot longer and it requires a lot more consistency when you're setting boundaries with children.
The consistency with children is intense, and it's the same thing. So it's a lot of work. So I will say, like, as we're going through this, you might be thinking to yourself, gosh, is it worth it?
Why should I bother?
Why should I bother? Why should I bother? And the truth is, sometimes it's not worth it. It's not worth bothering, and that's okay. You are going to know, and that's the thing. If you've done your prioritization filter, you've gone through the systems, and you've gone, okay, everything makes sense except for this one report that I'm writing for this person that isn't even my report, and I know that this is going to happen again next week, and it's taking up my afternoons, and I'm getting home from work late, and my partner is exhausted and wondering why I'm exhausted. And just think about the outcome of not setting the boundary. That's going to help you decide whether it's important for you to do. And talk to people, talk to your support network if you have one, to try and get a sense of it. But then don't forget to talk to the person.
Yeah, definitely planning things ahead of time is always really good for a neurodivergent brain. Like, what am I going to say? Like, all of that. But of course, then we have to remember to finish the last 5%.
Exactly.
Arguably the hardest part.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is a little bit on how to set boundaries with ADHD. We hope you enjoyed this. It's a little bit different for us. We usually bring the research and not so much the strategies, but let us know if you liked it. Let us know if you found it helpful.
Yeah, for sure. If you want more like skill workshop stuff from the podcast, let us know. You can actually find us on Substack. So there will be some more details on that.
Yes, there will be more details on that soon, but you can find us on Substack. That is where we're going to be the most active, and that is where you're going to find the most research and strategies to just add to your ADHD Skills Lab library. Awesome. Great to see you guys this week. Good luck with your boundaries. Let us know how it goes.
Yes. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening, everyone. And a big thank you to Adam for making us sound great and Anastasia for making us look great. We couldn't do it without you.
And if you're looking for any of the references to the papers that we discuss, head on over to our show notes page because I always bring the receipts.
Plus, if you want to find out more about us or any more deep diving into what we're doing, you can find us on Substack. That's where the community is. That's where we're chatting. And you can see all of the fun and exciting things that we are bringing to the table.
Thanks for being here.